My son abandoned me in a nursing home on my birthday. A week later, I bought a lottery ticket and won $53 million. When they saw me on television, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. "Dad, we need to talk." My response shocked the greedy man. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never thought my 66th birthday would be the day my own son threw me away like garbage. The morning started normal enough. I was in my small kitchen, making myself scrambled eggs and toast, humming an old tune Margaret used to love. The house felt too quiet without her, but after 3 years, I'd gotten used to the silence. I was looking forward to Alan coming over. He'd promised to take me out for lunch, maybe to that diner we used to go to when he was a kid. When the doorbell rang at exactly 10 in the morning, my heart lifted. Alan was always punctual, something I'd taught him. I shuffled to the door, my arthritis acting up more than usual, and opened it with a smile. "Happy birthday, Dad," he said, but something was wrong. His voice was flat, mechanical. Behind him stood his wife Jennifer, holding a clipboard and wearing that pinched expression she always had around me. And there was someone else, a woman in scrubs I didn't recognize. "Alan, sweetheart, come in," I said, stepping aside. "I was just making some coffee. Jennifer, how are you?" Jennifer barely looked at me. "We need to talk, Joseph." The way she said my name, like it tasted bitter in her mouth, made my stomach clench. Alan wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between them. "Who's this lady?" The woman in scrubs stepped forward. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm Susan from Sunset Manor. We're here to help with your transition." "Transition?" The word hit me like a physical blow. "What transition? Alan, what is she talking about?" My son finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my knees weak. There was no warmth, no love, just cold determination and something that looked almost like annoyance. "Dad, we can't do this anymore," he said. "Jennifer and we've been talking. You can't live alone anymore. It's not safe." "I'm fine," I said quickly, my voice getting higher. "I take care of myself just fine. I don't need—" "You fell last month," Jennifer interrupted. "You could have been seriously hurt." I slipped on some water. Anyone could slip on water. "You forgot to turn off the stove twice last week," Alan added, his voice getting stronger, more confident in his cruelty. "Mrs. Peterson next door called me. She was worried about a fire." That wasn't true. I'd never forgotten the stove. Mrs. Peterson was a busybody who complained about everything. But looking at Alan's face, I realized it didn't matter if it was true or not. His mind was made up. "I've already signed the papers," he continued, pulling out a folder from his jacket. "Sunset Manor is a nice place. They'll take good care of you." "On my birthday?" The words came out as a whisper. "You're doing this on my birthday?" For just a second, Alan's mask slipped. I saw something that might have been guilt flicker across his face. But Jennifer's hand touched his arm, and whatever doubt he'd had vanished. "The timing isn't ideal," Susan from the nursing home said gently, "but we have a room available today, and waiting lists can be quite long." I looked around my living room, the couch where Margaret and I used to watch television together, the bookshelf Alan had built for me when he graduated college, the pictures of him growing up, from his first steps to his wedding day, covering the mantel. "This is my home," I said, my voice breaking. "This is where your mother and I raised you, where we brought you home from the hospital." "Where we—" "Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be," Alan said. But he still wouldn't look directly at me. "Harder for who?" I shot back, anger finally cutting through the shock. "Harder for you. Do you have any idea what you're doing to me?" Jennifer stepped closer to Alan, linking her arm through his like she was protecting him from me. "Joseph, we know this is difficult, but Alan has his own family to think about now. He can't be worrying about you constantly." "When has he ever worried about me constantly?" I demanded. "When was the last time you called, Alan? When was the last time you came to see me just because you wanted to?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Susan cleared her throat. "Mr. Hartwell, why don't you pack a few things? Just some clothes and personal items to start. We can arrange for the rest later." "No," the word came out stronger than I felt. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my house." "Alan, you can't just—" "Actually, I can," Alan said, and now his voice was hard, businesslike. "I have power of attorney for health decisions. Dr. Martinez already signed off on this. You're not competent to live alone anymore." The betrayal hit me so hard I had to grab the doorframe to steady myself. Dr. Martinez, who I'd trusted for 15 years, who had assured me just last month that I was doing fine for my age. "You planned this," I whispered. "You've been planning this." Alan's jaw tightened. "We've been planning what's best for you. What's best for me, or what's most convenient for you." "This time," Jennifer answered, "Alan has been stressed about this for months. He has a demanding job, 2 children to raise. He can't be checking on you every day." I never asked him to check on me every day. I asked him to call once in a while. I asked him to remember my birthday. "We remembered your birthday," Alan said defensively. "We're here." I looked at the woman in scrubs, at the clipboard Jennifer was holding, at the determined set of my son's shoulders. "This is your idea of remembering my birthday, throwing me in a nursing home." "It's an assisted living facility," Susan corrected gently. "Very nice. You'll have your own room, meals provided, activities." "I don't want activities. I want my home. I want my son to act like he gives a damn about me." Alan finally exploded. "I do give a damn. Why do you think I'm doing this? You think I want to put you in a home? You think this is easy for me? Then don't do it," I pleaded. "Please, Alan. We can figure something else out. I can get someone to check on me. I can—" "No, Dad. It's done." He pulled out his phone. "The movers will be here this afternoon for your things. Susan will help you pack what you need right now." Movers. He'd already arranged for movers. On my birthday, while I was making eggs and humming Margaret's favorite song, my son was orchestrating the dismantling of my entire life. I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream, to throw them all out, to call the police. But I was 66 years old, alone, and my own son was telling strangers that I wasn't competent to make my own decisions. Who would believe me? 30 minutes later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Susan's Honda, watching my house disappear in the side mirror. Alan and Jennifer had already left, mumbling something about needing to pick up their kids from soccer practice. They didn't even wait to see me go. The last thing I saw was Mrs. Peterson peeking through her curtains, watching the show. As we drove toward Sunset Manor, I thought about Margaret, about how she'd always worried that Alan was too selfish, too focused on himself. I'd defended him then, told her he'd grow out of it, that he just needed time to mature. I was wrong. He'd grown into exactly the man she'd feared he'd become, and now I was completely alone. The first thing that hit me about Sunset Manor wasn't the smell, though that came second, a mixture of disinfectant and something I didn't want to identify. It was the sound, or rather, the lack of it. The silence was different from my house. At home, the quiet felt peaceful, full of memories. Here, it felt dead, empty, like hope had been sucked out through the industrial air vents. Susan walked me through the lobby, past a common area where several residents sat staring at a television turned up too loud. None of them were really watching it. Their eyes had that glazed look I'd seen on Margaret's face toward the end, when the pain medication made everything fuzzy. "This is your room," Susan said, opening a door marked 237. "You'll be sharing with Mr. Franklin. He's very quiet. Hardly any trouble at all." The room was smaller than my bathroom at home. 2 narrow beds, 2 small dressers, 1 window that looked out onto a parking lot. Mr. Franklin was already there, a skeletal man with wild white hair, sitting on his bed and staring at nothing. "Hello," I said to him. He didn't respond, didn't even blink. "He had a stroke," Susan whispered. "Limited speech, but he's harmless." Harmless. Like that was the most important thing about a human being. I set my small suitcase on the empty bed and looked around what would now be my world. Alan had packed for me while I sat in shock in the living room. He'd thrown in some clothes, my blood pressure medication, and 1 photo. The formal portrait we'd taken when he graduated college. Not the picture of Margaret and me on our wedding day. Not the photo of him as a baby that I kept on my nightstand. Just the one where he looked successful. "Dinner is at 5, Susan said. "Breakfast at 8, lunch at noon. Medications are distributed at 9, 1, and 6. Any questions?" I had 1,000 questions. When would I see my son again? When could I go home? What happened to the rest of my belongings? But looking at Susan's efficient smile, I realized she didn't have answers to any of the questions that mattered. "No," I said quietly. She left me alone with Mr. Franklin and the silence. The first week was the hardest. I kept expecting Alan to call, to visit, to maybe even admit he'd made a mistake. Every time the phone rang at the nurse's station, my heart would jump, but it was never for me. The routine at Sunset Manor was designed to break down any sense of independence. Wake up when they told you to wake up. Eat what they put in front of you. Take your pills when they brought them. Sit where they told you to sit. They treated us like children, but children whose families actually wanted them. The other residents were a mix of the forgotten and the broken. There was Mrs. Chen, whose daughter visited every few months with forced cheerfulness and always seemed relieved to leave. Mr. Rodriguez, who told anyone who'd listen that his son was just too busy with work to come see him. And Dorothy, who insisted her family was coming to take her home any day now, even though she'd been there for 4 years. I found myself drawn to Frank Mitchell, a former mechanic whose hands shook from Parkinson's but whose mind was still sharp. We'd sit in the common room and talk about baseball, about the old neighborhood, about anything except why we were there. My boy promised he'd visit every week, Frank told me one afternoon. That was 8 months ago. Funny how busy people get when you're not useful anymore. I thought about Alan, about all the years I'd worked double shifts at the factory to pay for his college, to buy him the car he wanted for graduation, to help with the down payment on his first house. Had I been useful then, or had I just been convenient? The food at Sunset Manor was as depressing as everything else. Overcooked vegetables, mystery meat, coffee that tasted like brown water. I'd lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks, not from any illness, but because nothing tasted like it was worth eating. "You need to try to eat more," said Linda, one of the nicer nurses. "Your son would be worried if he knew you weren't taking care of yourself." I almost laughed. Alan had been worried enough to dump me here on my birthday, but apparently not worried enough to check if I was still alive. The nights were the worst. Mr. Franklin would sometimes cry out in his sleep, calling for someone named Betty. The walls were thin, and I could hear Mrs. Chen in the next room coughing through the night. Sometimes I'd hear crying from the rooms around me, other people realizing what I was learning, that we were here to be forgotten. I'd lie in my narrow bed and think about Margaret. She'd been so angry when she was dying, angry at the cancer, angry at God, angry at the unfairness of it all, but mostly she'd been angry at the thought of leaving me alone. "Promise me you won't let Alan walk all over you," she'd whispered during one of our last conversations. "He's got a selfish streak, Joseph. He always has. Don't let him take advantage of your good nature." I'd promised her, but I'd failed. Just like I'd apparently failed at everything else. 3 weeks into my stay at Sunset Manor, I overheard 2 nurses talking in the hallway. "Room 237 never gets visitors," one said. "Kind of sad." "The son signed him in," the other replied. "Haven't seen him since. Some families just dump them and disappear. Dump them and disappear." Is that what I was? Something that had been dumped? I thought about calling Alan myself, but every time I reached for the phone in the common room, I stopped. What would I say? "Please remember you have a father. Please pretend to care about the man who raised you." The words stuck in my throat, too pathetic to voice. Instead, I'd sit by the window in my room and watch the parking lot. Cars would come and go, families visiting other residents. I learned to recognize the patterns. The daughter who came every Sunday but never stayed long. The grandson who showed up with guilt gifts but couldn't wait to leave. The son who visited monthly and spent the whole time on his phone. But no one came for me. On my 4th Tuesday at Sunset Manor, Frank had a bad fall in the bathroom. They took him to the hospital and he never came back. Dorothy told me he'd died 2 days later, alone, with no family by his side. "At least it was quick," she said, but her eyes were scared. We were all scared of the same thing, dying in this place, forgotten by the people we'd spent our lives loving. That night I wrote Alan a letter. I poured everything out. How much I missed home, how sorry I was for whatever I'd done wrong, how much I loved him despite everything. I told him about Margaret's last words, about how proud I'd always been of him, about how lonely I was. I never sent it. What was the point? He'd made his choice. I was his past, and he was focused on his future. But lying in that narrow bed, listening to Mr. Franklin's empty space and the sound of other people's forgotten dreams, I made a choice too. I wasn't going to die here feeling sorry for myself. Somehow, some way, I was going to find a reason to keep going. I just had no idea that reason would come from a crumpled lottery ticket and $2 in quarters. A month into my stay at Sunset Manor, they started taking us on supervised trips to the grocery store. Community integration, they called it, though it felt more like parading prisoners around to remind the outside world we still existed. I almost didn't go on that first trip. What was the point? I had no money to buy anything special, and seeing the normal world would only remind me of what I'd lost. But Dorothy convinced me. "Come on, Joseph," she said, adjusting her worn cardigan. It beats staring at these walls all day. Besides, maybe you'll see something that reminds you of home. Home. The word still hurt, but I went anyway. The grocery store felt overwhelming after weeks in the beige monotony of Sunset Manor. Bright lights, music playing overhead, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery section. Normal people going about their normal lives, pushing carts full of food for families who were waiting for them. I walked slowly through the aisles with my small basket, trying to make the experience last. The supervised trips only happened once a week, and this hour of freedom was the only time I felt human anymore. I picked up a small container of ice cream, Rocky Road, Margaret's favorite, and some decent coffee. Small luxuries that might make the institutional food more bearable. As I approached the checkout line, I passed the customer service counter where they sold lottery tickets. There was no line, just a bored-looking teenager scrolling through her phone behind the counter. I stopped walking. Margaret and I used to buy lottery tickets occasionally, always using the same numbers. Her birthday, my birthday, our wedding anniversary, and the day Alan was born. We never expected to win anything, but Margaret said it was fun to dream. Dreams don't cost much, she'd always say, just $1 and some hope. I found myself walking toward the counter before I'd consciously decided to do it. "Can I help you?" the girl asked without looking up from her phone. "A Powerball ticket, please." She finally looked at me, taking in my discount store clothes and the Sunset Manor name tag they made us wear on outings. "Quick pick or you got numbers?" "I have numbers." My voice came out steadier than I felt. I recited them from memory. 03, 15, 22, 07, 41. Powerball 18. March 15th was Margaret's birthday. May 22nd was mine. July 7th was our wedding anniversary. April 1st was when Alan was born, though the joke seemed to be on me now. The Powerball number was 18, the date of our first kiss. The girl printed the ticket and handed it to me. $2. In my old life, that was nothing. Now, it represented a significant portion of my weekly allowance from the nursing home's petty cash system. I folded the ticket carefully and put it in my wallet, next to my Medicare card and the photo of Margaret I'd managed to salvage from Alan's hasty packing job. On the bus ride back to Sunset Manor, Dorothy noticed me touching my wallet. "What's got you looking so mysterious?" she asked. "Just bought a lottery ticket." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "Good for you. What numbers did you play?" I told her about Margaret's system, about how we'd used the same numbers for 30 years. "She sounds like she was a wonderful woman," Dorothy said softly. "She was. She would have hated this place." "Would she have hated you for being here?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, would she blame you for what your son did, for ending up here?" I thought about it as we pulled into the Sunset Manor parking lot. Margaret had always been protective of me, sometimes more than I was of myself. She'd seen through people's facades in ways I never could. She'd worried about Alan's selfishness, about his tendency to take without giving back. "No," I said finally. "She wouldn't blame me. She'd be furious at Alan." "Then maybe you shouldn't blame yourself either." That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of Mr. Franklin's occasional outbursts or the thin mattress, but because I kept thinking about that lottery ticket. Not because I thought I'd win. The odds were astronomical. But because buying it had made me feel connected to Margaret again. I remembered our ritual when we'd buy tickets. We'd sit at the kitchen table on Saturday nights, Margaret would make her special hot chocolate, and we'd talk about what we'd do if we won. Never anything extravagant. Margaret was too practical for that. We'd pay off the house, maybe take a trip to Ireland where her grandparents came from, make sure Alan's college was fully funded, and I'd buy you a proper workshop, she'd always add. I'd been handy with woodworking, and she knew I'd always wanted space to build furniture. Nothing fancy, just somewhere you could make beautiful things. We'd dream for an hour or two, then tuck the ticket into the Bible on Margaret's nightstand and forget about it until the drawing. We never won more than $20 in all those years, but it wasn't about winning. It was about dreaming together. The drawing was supposed to be Saturday night. I'd almost forgotten about it until Mrs. Chen mentioned something about checking her numbers during dinner on Saturday. "I never win," she said, stirring her lukewarm soup. "But my daughter says it's good to have hope." Hope. When was the last time I'd felt hopeful about anything? That evening, I sat in the common room with several other residents, watching the local news. Most of them were dozing in their chairs, but I was wide awake, waiting for the lottery numbers. The ticket felt heavy in my shirt pocket, like it was burning a hole through the fabric. The news anchor was a young woman with perfectly styled hair who looked like she'd never had a serious problem in her life. She reported on local politics, a car accident on the interstate, and a story about a school fundraiser with the same artificially cheerful tone. And now for tonight's Powerball drawing, she said. Tonight's jackpot has reached $53 million. $53 million. I tried to imagine what that much money looked like. I'd never made more than $40,000 in my best year at the factory. The lottery machine appeared on screen, those familiar clear spheres bouncing with white and red balls. One by one, the numbers popped up: 03, 15, 22, 07, 41. My heart stopped. Those were my numbers. Margaret's numbers. Our numbers. And the Powerball number is 18. The remote control slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor. Mrs. Chen jerked awake and looked around in confusion. "What happened?" she asked. I couldn't speak. I pulled the ticket from my pocket with shaking hands and checked it again. 03, 15, 22, 07, 41. Powerball 18. The same numbers displayed on the screen. "Joseph, are you all right?" Dorothy had appeared beside my chair. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I think. My voice wouldn't work properly. "I think I just won the lottery." The room went completely silent. Even Mr. Rodriguez, who usually mumbled constantly to himself, stopped talking. "What did you say?" Mrs. Chen was fully awake now. I held up the ticket, my hand trembling so badly I could barely keep it steady. "These are my numbers, all of them." Dorothy grabbed the ticket and held it up to the light, comparing it to the numbers still displayed on the television screen. Her eyes went wide. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, Joseph, these match." Word spread through Sunset Manor like wildfire. Within minutes, it seemed like every resident who could walk was crowded into the common room. Linda, the night nurse, came rushing in to see what the commotion was about. "What's going on here?" she demanded. "Mr. Hartwell thinks he won the lottery," Mrs. Chen announced. Linda looked skeptical until Dorothy showed her the ticket and pointed to the television screen where they were still displaying the winning numbers. "We need to verify this," Linda said, her professional composure slipping. "We need to call the lottery office." "They're closed," I managed to say. "It's Saturday night." "First thing Monday morning then," she said. "Until then, we need to keep this quiet and secure." She looked around the room at the crowd of excited residents. "Everyone back to your rooms. We don't know anything for certain yet." But as people slowly dispersed, chattering excitedly among themselves, I caught the way Linda was looking at me, like I'd suddenly become someone important, someone worth paying attention to. I sat alone in the common room after everyone left, staring at the ticket in my hands. $53 million. More money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. More money than I'd ever dreamed of having. For the first time since Alan dropped me at Sunset Manor, I smiled. Not a polite, resigned smile, but a real one. Margaret had always said everything happened for a reason. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was still some justice left in the world after all. But as I made my way back to room 237, I started thinking about what this would mean. Alan would find out eventually. The whole world would find out. And then what? I thought about my son, about the cold way he'd looked at me on my birthday, about how quickly he'd been willing to erase me from his life, about Jennifer's smug satisfaction as they drove away. They'd thrown me away when they thought I was worthless. Now I couldn't wait to see what they'd do when they realized they'd made the biggest mistake of their lives. I didn't sleep at all Saturday night. I kept the lottery ticket in my hand, checking and rechecking the numbers until I had them memorized forwards and backwards. Every few minutes I'd convince myself I'd made a mistake, that my old eyes had played tricks on me. Then I'd look again, and there they were. Margaret's numbers, our numbers, matching exactly what I'd seen on television. By Sunday morning, word had spread throughout Sunset Manor despite Linda's attempts to keep it quiet. Residents who usually ignored me were suddenly finding excuses to walk past room 237. The staff was treating me differently too, not quite with respect, but with a careful politeness I hadn't experienced since arriving. "Morning, Mr. Hartwell," said Janet, the weekend nurse, bringing my medications. She'd never bothered to learn my name before, just called me room 237, or honey, in that condescending tone they used with all of us. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, lingering by my bed longer than necessary. "About the same as yesterday," I said, but we both knew that wasn't true. Dorothy appeared in my doorway as soon as Janet left. "Any word yet?" "They don't open until 9, I reminded her. We'd been through this conversation 6 times already. "I barely slept," she confessed. "I kept thinking about what you'll do with all that money." The truth was, I hadn't thought much beyond the moment of winning. $53 million was such an impossible amount that my brain couldn't process it. I'd spent most of the night thinking about Margaret, wondering if somehow she'd arranged this from wherever she was now. At exactly 9 o'clock, Linda appeared with the phone from the nurse's station. Ready to call? My hands were shaking as I dialed the lottery office. The phone rang 3 times before a cheerful voice answered. State Lottery Office, this is Rebecca. I think I might have won something, I said, feeling foolish. From Saturday night's drawing. Congratulations, do you have your ticket number? I read off the series of numbers printed at the bottom of my ticket, my voice getting steadier with each digit. 1 moment, please, Rebecca said. I could hear typing on the other end. The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Sir, are you still there? Yes. Can you please verify the numbers you played? I recited them again. 03, 15, 22, 07, 41, Powerball 18. More typing. Another long pause. Mr. She paused. Mr. Hartwell. Yes. Sir, you need to come into our office as soon as possible. You're going to need to speak with our security department and bring proper identification. Does that mean? Sir, I can't confirm specific amounts over the phone, but you should definitely come in today if you can manage it. After I hung up, Linda stared at me with wide eyes. What did they say? They want me to come in today. Word of the phone call spread even faster than news of my possible win. By the time lunch was served, I noticed that several residents who'd never spoken to me before were trying to sit at my table. The staff was being unusually attentive, asking if I needed anything, if I was comfortable, if there was anyone I wanted to call. We'll need to arrange transportation, Linda said during lunch. Do you have family we should contact? Someone who could drive you? Family. The word felt like a punch to the stomach. No, I said quietly. No family. That afternoon, Linda drove me to the lottery office herself. The whole way there, she kept making small talk, asking about my life, my interests, whether I was happy at Sunset Manor. It was the most attention any staff member had paid to me since I'd arrived. The lottery office was smaller than I'd expected, just a few rooms in a generic office building. But the security was obvious. Cameras everywhere, thick glass windows, and a metal detector at the entrance. Rebecca turned out to be a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who treated me like I was her favorite grandfather. She led me to a private room where 2 other officials were waiting. Mr. Hartwell, said a serious-looking man in a suit, we've verified your ticket. Congratulations. You've won the Powerball jackpot of $53 million. The words hit me like a physical force. I actually felt dizzy, and Rebecca quickly brought me a chair and a glass of water. Are you all right? She asked. I wasn't all right. I was the furthest thing from all right. I was a forgotten old man who'd been thrown away by his own son, and I'd just won more money than I could comprehend. What happens now? I managed to ask. The next hour was a blur of paperwork, explanations, and decisions I wasn't prepared to make. Lump sum versus annuity payments, tax implications, legal representation, media requests. The lump sum, after taxes, would be approximately $31 million. The man in the suit explained. The annuity would pay out the full amount over 30 years, but you'd receive less up front. $31 million. I tried to imagine what that looked like, what it weighed, how much space it would take up. I need time to think, I said. Of course. But Mr. Hartwell, I should warn you, news of lottery wins this size usually leaks out quickly. You might want to consider how you want to handle the publicity. Publicity. I thought about Alan, about Jennifer, about all the people who'd written me off as irrelevant. They were about to find out just how wrong they'd been. How quickly does the news usually get out? Often within 24 hours. Local media especially keeps close tabs on big winners. We arranged for me to return the next day to finalize my decision and claim the prize officially. Linda was unusually quiet on the drive back to Sunset Manor, but I could feel her stealing glances at me like she was seeing me for the first time. When we arrived, a small crowd of residents was waiting in the lobby. Mrs. Chen started crying the moment she saw my face. It's real, isn't it? She asked. I nodded, still not quite believing it myself. The celebration that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced at Sunset Manor. People who'd barely acknowledged my existence were suddenly my best friends. The staff brought out a bottle of sparkling cider they'd been saving for special occasions. Everyone wanted to hear about the lottery office, about what the officials had said, about what I was going to do with the money. But as the evening wore on and the excitement died down, I found myself sitting alone in the common room, staring out the window at the parking lot. Everything had changed, but nothing had changed. I was still in the same narrow bed, still eating the same terrible food, still surrounded by the same forgotten people. The only difference was that now I had the power to change it all. That night, I lay awake thinking about Alan. He'd probably see me on the news tomorrow, or someone would call him, or the story would pop up on his social media. I tried to imagine his face when he realized that the father he'd discarded had just become wealthier than he'd ever dreamed of being. Would he feel guilty? Would he realize what a mistake he'd made? Or would he just see an opportunity? I thought I knew Alan, but then again, I'd thought he'd never abandoned me in a nursing home on my birthday. My son had become a stranger to me, and I was about to become a stranger to the world. Mr. Franklin stirred in his bed and mumbled something that sounded like Betty. He was dreaming about someone who'd probably forgotten him too. The difference was, no one was going to call Betty tomorrow to tell her that Mr. Franklin had just won $53 million. I touched the ticket, still in my shirt pocket. Margaret's numbers had changed everything. Now I had to decide what to do with that change. The phone at the nurse's station rang, and I heard footsteps in the hallway. I wondered if it was starting already, if someone had found out, if my moment of anonymity was coming to an end. Tomorrow the world would know that Joseph Hartwell, forgotten father and discarded senior citizen, was suddenly one of the richest men in the state, and then we'd see who really cared about family. The news broke at 6 in the morning on Tuesday. I was in the dining hall, choking down runny eggs and burnt toast, when Linda came rushing in with her phone in her hand. "Mr. Hartwell, you need to see this." She showed me the screen. There was my face, a photo that must have been taken yesterday at the lottery office, next to a headline that read, "Local nursing home resident wins $53 million Powerball jackpot." The article was short, but detailed enough to make my stomach turn. It mentioned Sunset Manor by name, described me as a widowed father, and included quotes from lottery officials about the size of the win. What it didn't mention was why a 66-year-old man was living in a nursing home instead of his own house. "How did they get this information so fast?" I asked. Linda looked uncomfortable. "These things have a way of getting out. Are you ready for this?" I wasn't ready for anything, but it didn't matter. Within an hour, everything changed. The first sign was the phones. The nurse's station phone started ringing constantly. Reporters, distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years, people claiming to be old friends. Linda had to assign someone just to field the calls. Then came the visitors. I was sitting in the common room, trying to process what my life had become, when I heard a commotion in the lobby. Through the glass doors, I could see someone arguing with the receptionist. Someone familiar. My heart stopped. Alan. He burst through the doors like a man on fire, his eyes wild, scanning the room until they landed on me. Behind him, Jennifer followed more cautiously, her face pale but determined. "Dad!" Alan's voice carried across the entire common room. Every resident turned to stare. "Dad, I just heard. I can't believe it." He rushed toward me, arms outstretched like he was going to hug me. I stood up slowly, watching him approach, and something cold settled in my chest. This wasn't the son who'd left me here 6 weeks ago. This was a stranger wearing Alan's face, a stranger who suddenly cared very much about his father. "Alan." I kept my voice neutral. He grabbed me in a hug that felt as fake as everything else about this moment. Over his shoulder I could see Jennifer hanging back, calculating, already working out angles. "I'm so sorry I haven't been to visit," Alan said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Work has been crazy, but I've been thinking about you every day. Every day. 6 weeks of every day, and not one phone call." "Have you?" I asked. Something flickered in his eyes, but he pressed on. "Dad, this is incredible. $53 million. I mean, I always knew you were lucky, but this is amazing." He always knew I was lucky. The man who'd spent months convincing himself and everyone else that I was incompetent and needed to be institutionalized had always known I was lucky. "We need to talk," Alan continued, gripping my arm. "There's so much to figure out. Legal stuff, financial planning. I've already called my lawyer." Of course he had. He'd heard about my windfall this morning and had already called his lawyer. "Alan," I said quietly, "why don't we sit down?" Jennifer finally approached, her smile bright and completely artificial. "Joseph, congratulations. This is such wonderful news for the family." "For the family. 6 weeks ago I wasn't family enough to keep in my own home. Now I was family again. We sat in a corner of the common room, away from the other residents who were pretending not to listen to every word. Alan pulled out his phone and started talking about advisors, investment strategies, trust funds. Jennifer nodded along, occasionally adding comments about tax implications and estate planning. "The first thing we need to do is get you out of here," Alan said, gesturing around the common room like it was a prison. "I mean, Dad, you're a millionaire now. You can't stay in a place like this." A place like this. The same place he'd put me 6 weeks ago because it was the best option for everyone. "Where would I go?" I asked. "Well, we've been talking about that," Jennifer said, leaning forward. "We think you should come stay with us while we figure out the permanent arrangements. Just temporarily, of course, until we can find you something appropriate. We have plenty of room," Alan added. "The kids would love to see their grandfather more often." The kids, my grandchildren, who I'd seen exactly 3 times in the past 2 years, who Alan had never brought to visit me here, not once. "That's very generous," I said slowly, "but I'm settled here for now." Alan's smile faltered. "Dad, you can't be serious. This place is. I mean, it's fine for people who don't have options, but you have options now." "You have choices." "Do I?" I met his eyes. 6 weeks ago, you told me I didn't have choices. You told me I was incompetent to make my own decisions. That was different," Alan said quickly. "That was about your safety, your health. This is about your future." "My future." I nodded slowly. "Tell me, Alan, what exactly do you think my future should look like?" He exchanged a glance with Jennifer before answering. "Well, obviously you'll want to be smart about this money. You'll need professional management, maybe a trust to protect your assets." Jennifer's been researching financial advisors who specialize in lottery winners. Jennifer had been researching. Of course she had. "And you think I'm capable of making those decisions now?" I asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, 6 weeks ago you had me declared incompetent. You said I couldn't be trusted to live alone, couldn't be trusted to make my own choices. Now you want me to make decisions about $53 million? Alan shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, that's not fair. That was about day-to-day safety issues. This is about financial planning. So I'm competent enough to choose how to spend my money, but not competent enough to choose where to live." The silence stretched between us. Around the common room, other residents were watching our family drama unfold with the fascination of people who'd been forgotten by their own families. Jennifer broke the silence. "Joseph, we're just trying to help. This is a life-changing amount of money. You'll need guidance. Guidance from people who cared so much about my well-being that they didn't visit me once in 6 weeks." Alan's face reddened. "I told you work has been busy," I finished. "Yes, you mentioned that. Too busy to call. Too busy to visit, but not too busy to rush over here the minute you heard about the money." "That's not what this is about," Alan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The boy I'd raised, the young man I'd been so proud of, had been replaced by someone who saw his own father as nothing more than a source of inconvenience or opportunity, depending on the circumstances. "Mr. Hartwell." Linda appeared beside our table. "There are some reporters outside asking to speak with you. And," she hesitated, "there are several other people claiming to be family members." Through the window, I could see news vans in the parking lot. A small crowd was gathering near the entrance. "Other family members?" Alan asked sharply. "Your cousin David from Phoenix," Linda read from a piece of paper. "Your nephew Michael from Dallas. Someone claiming to be your brother-in-law, though he couldn't remember your wife's name when we asked." I almost laughed. Margaret's brother had died 5 years ago, but apparently someone thought I wouldn't remember that detail. "This is getting out of hand," Jennifer said. "We need to get you somewhere private, away from all this chaos." "Do we?" I asked. Alan leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Dad, listen to me. You're not thinking clearly. All these people, they're going to try to take advantage of you. You need protection. You need family looking out for you." Family. There was that word again. "I need to think about all this," I said, standing up. "This has been a lot to process." "Of course," Alan said, standing too. "But Dad, promise me you won't make any major decisions without talking to us first. Promise me you won't sign anything or give money to anyone until we can get proper legal advice." I looked at him for a long moment. 6 weeks ago, he'd made a major decision about my life without talking to me first. He'd signed papers committing me to this place without asking what I wanted. I promise I'll be very careful about who I trust, I said. Relief flooded his face. He didn't understand that he was no longer on the list of people I trusted. As Alan and Jennifer prepared to leave, promising to return the next day with lawyers and financial advisors, I watched them through the window. They stood in the parking lot for several minutes, talking animatedly. I could see Alan gesturing, Jennifer pointing back at the building. They were making plans, strategies for handling their suddenly valuable father. Mrs. Chen came and sat beside me as the news vans multiplied outside. "You know what the saddest part is?" she said softly. "What's that?" "Yesterday, you were just Joseph, a nice man who'd been forgotten by his family. Today, you're worth $53 million, and suddenly everyone remembers you exist." She was right. Money had a way of creating family where none had existed, of inspiring love where there had been only indifference. That evening, I sat in my narrow bed listening to Mr. Franklin mumble in his sleep and thought about Margaret. She'd always worried that Alan was too focused on himself, too concerned with appearances and success to really understand what mattered in life. "Money doesn't change people," she used to say. "It just reveals who they really are." Tomorrow, Alan would be back with his lawyers and his plans. Other relatives would crawl out of the woodwork, all with stories about how much they'd always cared about me, how worried they'd been, how they'd just been waiting for the right time to reconnect. But tonight, I knew exactly who they all really were, and more importantly, I was finally beginning to understand who I really was too. Alan returned the next morning with an entourage. 2 lawyers, a financial advisor, and Jennifer carrying a briefcase like she was negotiating a corporate merger. They'd clearly been up all night planning their approach to managing my newfound wealth. I was waiting for them in the small conference room Linda had arranged, sitting calmly with my hands folded. I'd spent the night thinking, and for the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. "Dad, I hope you've had time to think about our conversation yesterday," Alan said, settling into his chair with the confidence of someone who believed he was in control. "We've put together a comprehensive plan for managing your winnings." The financial advisor, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, spread papers across the table. "Mr. Hartwell, congratulations on your incredible luck. With proper management, $53 million can grow substantially over time. We're recommending a diversified portfolio with—" "That won't be necessary," I said quietly. Alan blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've already decided what to do with the money." Jennifer leaned forward, her pen poised over a legal pad. "That's wonderful, Joseph. What are you thinking?" I looked around the table at these people who'd materialized the moment my bank account became interesting. 3 days ago, Alan couldn't be bothered to return my calls. Now he had lawyers. "I'm giving it all away." The silence that followed was deafening. Alan's mouth actually fell open. The financial advisor looked like I'd just announced I was setting myself on fire. "Dad," Alan said carefully, like he was talking to someone having a mental breakdown. "What did you just say?" "I'm donating the money. All of it." "All of it?" Jennifer's voice came out as a squeak. "Well, not all of it. I'm keeping enough to buy a small house and live comfortably for the rest of my life. But the rest, about $50 million, is going to charity." Alan shot to his feet. "Absolutely not. Dad, you can't be serious. This is exactly what I was worried about." "You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." "But the family?" Jennifer started. "What family?" I asked calmly. "The family that put me in here and forgot I existed." Alan began pacing, running his hands through his hair. "Dad, this is insane. You can't just throw away $50 million. "I'm not throwing it away. I'm putting it to good use." The financial advisor cleared his throat. "Mr. Hartwell, if I may, this is a very emotional time. Perhaps we should take a few days to—" "I've already contacted a lawyer," I said. "My own lawyer. The paperwork is being drawn up." Alan stopped pacing and stared at me. "Your own lawyer? When? How?" "Yesterday afternoon. Turns out when you're worth $50 million, lawyers return your phone calls very quickly." The truth was, I'd been thinking about this since the moment I realized what the money meant. Not the money itself, but what it represented. Power, choice, the ability to finally control my own life. "Dad, please," Alan said, sitting back down and reaching for my hand. "Let's be reasonable here. Think about your grandchildren. Think about their college funds, their future. I am thinking about them. I'm thinking about how they'll grow up in a world where their father abandoned his own parent the moment it became inconvenient. What kind of lesson is that? Alan's face flushed red. That's not fair. I didn't abandon you. I made sure you were safe, that you were cared for. You dumped me here on my birthday and disappeared for 6 weeks. I was dealing with my own problems. Do you have any idea how hard it was for me to make that decision? Not as hard as it was for me to live with it. Jennifer tried a different approach. Joseph, we understand you're hurt, but this money could do so much good for the family. We could all be together again. Where was this interest in being together 6 weeks ago? Alan slammed his hand on the table. Fine. You want me to apologize? I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I put you here. I'm sorry I didn't visit. I'm sorry for all of it. Now, can we please talk about this rationally? I looked at my son, at this man who thought an apology extracted under financial pressure could erase weeks of abandonment and neglect. Alan, I said softly, if I gave you $10 million right now, would you feel guilty about putting me here? What kind of question is that? An honest one. Would the money make you feel better about what you did? He hesitated just long enough to give me my answer. That's what I thought. I stood up, feeling steadier than I had in months. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Alan, Jennifer, I'll be in touch. Dad, wait! Alan jumped up. You can't just walk away from this conversation. Actually, I can. For the first time in months, I have choices. And my choice is to use this money to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to other people. What do you mean? Jennifer asked. I'm funding a foundation for elderly people who've been abandoned by their families. Housing, legal advocacy, companionship programs. I'm going to make sure other seniors don't end up forgotten in places like this. Alan looked like I'd physically struck him. You're doing this to hurt me. No, Alan. I'm doing this to help people who've been hurt the way I was hurt. The financial advisor made one last attempt. Mr. Hartwell, surely you could accomplish these charitable goals while still providing for your family. Even 10% of 50 million would what? Teach my son that abandoning his father was actually a smart financial move. That being cruel and selfish pays off in the end. I walked toward the door, then turned back. I'll be moving out of Sunset Manor next week. I found a nice little house about an hour from here. Close enough to oversee the foundation, far enough to start fresh. Dad, please. Alan's voice broke. Don't do this. We can work this out. We could have worked it out 6 weeks ago. We could have worked it out any time in the past month and a half when you couldn't be bothered to call. I'll do better. I'll visit every week. You'll visit every week as long as you think there's money in it for you. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Alan opened his mouth to deny it, but we both knew it was true. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the living room of my new house, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a nice yard and a view of the mountains. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Really mine, chosen by me, paid for by me, with no one else's name on the deed. The Joseph Hartwell Foundation for Senior Dignity was already in operation. We'd purchased and begun renovating 3 buildings to create comfortable, affordable housing for seniors who'd been abandoned or couldn't afford decent care. We'd hired social workers, started legal advocacy programs, and begun a volunteer program that paired isolated seniors with college students who needed internship credits. Margaret would have loved it. She always said money was only useful if you could use it to make other people's lives better. Alan had called dozens of times in the past 3 weeks. I'd answered exactly once, to tell him that I was fine, that I was happy, and that I hoped he'd learned something from all this. The calls had stopped after that. Dorothy visited me every few weeks. She'd been one of the first residents to move into our new facility, and the change in her was remarkable. She had her own apartment, her own schedule, her dignity intact. Any regrets? She asked during her last visit, sitting in my garden and sipping lemonade. I thought about it honestly. Did I regret giving away $50 million? Did I regret cutting off Alan? Did I regret choosing principle over family? None, I said, and meant it. What about Alan? Do you think he'll ever understand? I watched a cardinal land on the bird feeder I'd hung outside my kitchen window. Maybe, probably not, but that's not my responsibility anymore. Do you miss him? That was harder to answer. I miss the boy he used to be. I miss the man I thought he was. But I don't miss the person who put me in Sunset Manor and forgot I existed. The foundation had already helped 43 seniors find better living situations. We'd stopped 2 families from dumping elderly relatives in substandard facilities. We'd provided legal assistance to 12 people whose children were trying to steal their assets. Every person we helped felt like a small act of revenge against everyone who thought old people were disposable. But more than that, it felt like justice. My phone rang. For a moment, my heart jumped, hoping it might be Alan calling to say he understood, that he was proud of what I was doing, that he'd finally realized what really mattered. But it was Dr. Martinez, my new doctor, calling with my test results. Clean bill of health, strong heart, clear mind, good blood pressure. Funny how much better I felt when I wasn't carrying the weight of other people's indifference. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Somewhere out there, Alan was probably still angry about the money, still trying to figure out how to change my mind, still convinced that I'd made a mistake. But I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. Margaret had been right. Money didn't change people. It just revealed who they really were. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it gave you the power to become who you were always meant to be. I pulled out my wallet and looked at the old photo of Margaret, the one I'd carried through everything. "We did it, sweetheart," I whispered to her picture. "We finally did something that mattered." The cardinal returned to the feeder, bringing his mate this time. They fed together in the fading light, and I smiled. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new challenges, new opportunities to help people who'd been forgotten. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. Free, purposeful, and finally at peace. Now I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.